morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, joined here by trial attorney Janine Atamian. And we hope you had a great weekend, a long, restful weekend, because we're going to be back here covering the most important live trials and legal stories in the news today. A lot to talk about on this Monday, so let's get started. All right, Janine, is this a guy who just doesn't know how courtroom procedure works? He said his attorneys, basically told him a lot of things. Or is this a guy who just doesn't care and just wants to say and do whatever he wants to do?
Well, I think he doesn't care and he wants to say and do whatever he wants to do. But I think it's helpful to him that he had these outbursts because he seems to be mentally impaired, just by the way he's acting. But
they're not really doing a mental health kind of defense. They're talking more about his background. Yes, they discuss some deficiencies and impairments in his brain, where in terms of his mental cognition and things like that, but they never went with an insanity defense. I was always surprised by that, because listening to him on the stand, watching him in the open court, there seems to be grounds to say this guy's not all mentally there.
Yeah, I think we were here when the trial opened, and we both thought they were going to go for the insanity defense, and they didn't. But right now, I think we're in sentencing, and it's going to help mitigate.
Now, do you think this is a man who, once again, seems to won't jump on the stand? Is he going to testify? I think he is. You tell me.
I think he is. He told us he's going to.
What's he going to say differently this time around in the penalty phase than in the trial phase?
Well, I don't think that he's going to say much different. He's blaming the probation officer. He's blaming everybody but himself. And he says things like this was collateral damage. He takes no responsibility for his crime.
None. And that was the thing that really I probably set the jury off. Now, I want to ask you something. We believe the defense is going to call some expert today. The prosecution, and we're waiting to jump live, they're just doing kind of some housekeeping. One of the things they just said is they are asking for their expert witness to be in the courtroom while the defense expert testifies. The defense has objected. This is a live feed into the courtroom right now. What does that mean exactly? Why would they want this?
Well, they want their expert to hear what is being testified to. It's going to be something about the mental impairment, I'm sure. But usually you wouldn't want another witness to be able to hear a witness's testimony and kind of gear theirs towards that. So I don't think that they're going to get to do that.
Right, and say that this person's wrong. I mean, so you think it's going to be a mental health expert today? If that's who the defense is going to call as one of their final witnesses?
I mean, I think that's all they possibly could. They talked about his childhood. They talked about being in solitary confinement. So I think it's got to be.
And we may hear from this man once more. Wow, how frightening it was hearing him on the stand and some of the cold, callous things he had to say. I'm sure if he got on the stand, it'll probably be more of the same. Okay, so he paints a pretty traumatic picture of a childhood that the defendant was exposed to. How much effect is that going to have on this jury?
I don't think it has much of an effect, because here's the other brother and he's not out murdering people. They both lived through the same childhood. I don't think it's a strong, I understand why they did it to kind of drum up some sympathy, but it didn't work for me.
Now, what about the fact if you say, hey, listen, Scott Nelson's different. If you look at his brain chemistry, if you look at some injuries he's had, he's not in the same position as James Nelson. So is that something in totality the jury should consider?
Oh, absolutely. And additionally, the fact that he was in prison for 25 years, 19 of which he spent in solitary, that's important. They've got to, as the defense, they've got to point all of that out.
Now, I want to let our viewers know about what's happening in the courtroom right now. The defense's expert is on the stand. Now, we want to make a correction. We thought it was going to be Dr. George Woods. In reality, it is a different witness, Dr. Valerie McLean. She's a psychologist. I think she's qualifying herself right now. As soon as she's finished qualifying, we're going to jump back in, and we want to hear what she has to say. Should be an interesting witness, right? You believe this is going to revolve around mental health?
I do. Yeah, I'm interested to see what she'll say and how she ties it all together.
Yeah, and I think it's a good witness to end on, because they really want to understand what's going on in the head of Scott Nelson, although I don't really think that's a place you want to be, is it?
No, but I think we're going to end up with him, right?
Well, is it bad that I kind of want to see him back on the stand? I mean, he was just something to watch. And again, just watching him throughout the whole course of this trial has been all sorts of strange. I mean, let's just go back to when he had that outburst in court from last week. Watch. I object to the objections. Have you ever seen anything like this?
Absolutely not.
How do you control a client like that?
Well, I think she's doing the best she can. She pulled him outside. She gave him a talking to, because the other thing is he doesn't want to be not present for this. And that's basically the threat that they have for him.
Yeah, the judge said, you keep this up, you're going to be kicked out of this courtroom. Is that the right call? I mean, shouldn't, no matter what no matter what happens, shouldn't a defendant always be present in the courtroom? Tell me if this is crazy. Couldn't they have another measure where, you tell me if this actually happens, where they gag the actual defendant, where he can't actually speak? Has that ever happened before?
Not to my knowledge, and I don't think you could do that. It would be too prejudicial in front of the jury. I don't think you could do that. But I think you could absolutely remove him because, again, there is a jury that has to deliberate, that has to hear testimony, and he's stopping that from happening.
Yeah, it's just something to see. I mean, he's trying to control every aspect of this courtroom. Again, if he gets on the stand, you saw him on direct, you saw what he had to say on cross-examination during the trial phase, when he basically said, hey, listen, I killed her, but it wasn't my fault. It was my parole officer who basically got me kicked out of the home that I was staying in. He put the blame on everybody else. During this penalty phase, this is where the jury has to determine what his punishment will be. You think he's going to flavor any of this testimony a little bit differently and talk about what a death sentence would be like for him, what life in prison would be like for him? Is he going to change it, or is he just going to go back to blaming everybody else for what happened?
Well, he may talk about how that would affect him because, again, it's him about everything. He doesn't take responsibility. He even said that God was good to the parole officer because he was going to kill him too. Or that's who he was going to kill originally.
But he never, you're right, earlier you said he never showed remorse. He never once said that he's sorry. He basically called Ms. Fulford collateral damage. Is he going to change that tone and say, listen, she was collateral damage, but I regret what happened. It wasn't my fault, everybody. I wish this didn't happen. I feel sorry for the family. Is he going to say anything like that?
I don't know what he's going to say because he's a loose cannon. So, I mean, it remains to be seen what he's going to say. Again, this last witness is probably the strongest one for him because it can tie everything together. He's not helping himself.
Okay, so as she goes into really this history of and understanding of what neuropsychology is, I'm asking, where's this going? So where's this going, Janine?
So I guess she's building upon the brother's testimony about the abuse to the mother and the other brothers and to the defendant, but it's not that great for me.
3 hours to interview him. Is that enough time to really get a sense of who Scott Nelson is?
No, I don't think so. But the interesting thing is that she collaborated with the prosecution's witness that's actually sitting in. So that part was interesting.
Collaborated. Do you mean that there might be a situation where she's going to say something and then the prosecution's witness is going to disagree with her and there might be a conflict between these two experts?
I think that might be why the prosecution's witness is allowed to stay in. She did say that Dr. Pritchard shared reports with her, so there's something there, and I'm interested to see what that is.
I'm always fascinated when two experts who seem both very highly qualified disagree about a main conclusion, and that seems to be what we're going to have here, and it all centers around that man you see at the table, Scott Nelson. Let's go back live. Janine, it's interesting. As we learn more about Scott Nelson's childhood, it's very easy to say, as what you said before, well, he had a brother. He didn't grow up to be a killer. And, a lot of people have tough childhoods. They don't grow up to murder innocent people. The other side of it is maybe there's somebody on the jury that's listening to this and saying, wow, this is a really tough childhood. And, I've had similar things and I've almost went off the deep edge. I didn't, but I could understand how somebody who was rejected by the system and rejected by, his family, that perhaps could lead to this. And while it's not excusing behavior, maybe the death penalty isn't just. What do you think?
Well, I think it's hard to give someone a sentence of death in the first place. So it's very true that there could be a juror who can take these factors and make them mitigating factors and say, okay, so he's guilty. We all know he's guilty. We found him guilty, but we don't want to give him the death penalty.
And just so our viewers understand, because a jury is seated, it's understood that they can be objective and that they haven't already made up their minds on the death penalty, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're just ready to do it.
Well, you can think that you'd be perfectly fine, with the death penalty, but when you actually have to sentence someone to death, it's a different ballgame. It does become a little personal,
right,
even though you are objective.
And because they see him day in and day out. They see a man who they would ultimately pull the trigger on and say, hey, this is a person who should be sentenced to death. It's easier said than done. Let's go take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to be live.